Today is a very important day for Metroid fans, as it's the anniversary of the best game in the series. That's right, Metroid Blast is 10 years old! Okay, but seriously, it's also the 20th anniversary of Metroid Prime, and there's so much that makes it a classic in this day and age. Developer Retro Studios successfully brought Metroid into 3D with this game, all the while making it first person, a move so bold that many fans thought it would fail. Turns out, they were dead wrong. So we're going to celebrate this momentous triumph by talking about 5 ways Metroid Prime is still amazing 20 years later. To put it bluntly, Metroid Prime still looks amazing 2 decades later. How did the absolute wizards at Retro Studios do it? Games with realistic art styles tend to age poorly given technological developments, but Metroid Prime is one of the rare examples that is still striking, even if some elements are a bit dated, like low-res textures. And at the time, Metroid Prime was a technical showcase for the GameCube, sporting gorgeous lighting, highly detailed models, and environments all running at a nearly flawless 60 frames per second, which is something games still often struggle to hit. Nintendo really was playing with power back then, which is not something they do as much now. And it's interesting looking back on an era when Nintendo used to really push the boundaries of how good games could look. If that rumored HD remaster is true, they wouldn't need to do much to bring the graphics to modern standards. Now, it's one thing to look pretty, but my mother always told me it's what's on the inside that counts. And that's ultimately the same for Metroid Prime, which can only be described as intensely atmospheric, or maybe haunting, beautiful, tense, awe-inspiring. Truthfully, Metroid Prime evokes all kinds of emotions through various artistic means. The first thing that comes to mind is the music, composed by the legendary Kenji Yamamoto. Largely made up of synthetic beats, the score can range from the eerie sounds of Frigate Orpheon to the peaceful tones of Phendrana Drifts, all the way to the oh crap music of the Chozo Ghosts. All of the songs in Metroid Prime are perfect, and make the player feel how the game wants them to feel. I mean, how can you not get hyped when you hear the main menu music? The music isn't the only thing that adds to Metroid Prime's atmosphere, as sometimes none of it is needed at all, like the outside of Frigate Orpheon being drenched in the cold silence of space. And then BAM! A giant parasite corpse! Doesn't that fill you with dread? Metroid Prime's environments are visually striking, each containing their own vegetation, or lack thereof, animal life, and architecture adding to the deep history of Planet Talon 4, most of which can be scanned via the scan visor, for highly detailed information about each of those elements. It was a revolutionary feature that added to the environmental storytelling that's rarely been seen since. Furthermore, Metroid Prime brings the term first person to a whole new level, putting players inside Samus's helmet, displaying her HUD and the outlines of her visor, all of which shift around as you move. It's cool, but Retro Studios did not stop there, as they also included effects that put mist, water, or creature goo on Samus's visor for added immersion. Occasionally, you would see the reflection of her face from bright lights. It's an astonishing level of detail that truly made it feel like you were Samus Aran herself. But what really makes Retro Studios wizards is that they completed the seemingly impossible task of bringing Metroid, which had been entirely 2D up to that point, into 3D. Keep in mind that Metroid skipped the Nintendo 64 generation entirely after Super Metroid graced the SNES. It was tough for Nintendo to figure out how to bring it to 3D, as Super Metroid director Yoshio Sakamoto felt he shouldn't be the one to make a Metroid game for the Nintendo 64. Nintendo even asked another developer to make a Nintendo 64 Metroid game, and they declined. Finally, Retro Studios was brought onto the task for the GameCube, and Shigeru Miyamoto, who just recently turned 70, happy birthday, suggested they make the game first person, which was a perspective dominated by PC shooters like Doom and Quake. In spite of the public largely hating this idea, Retro Studios kept the soul of a Metroid game within Prime's DNA, all without making it one of those dude bro shooters fans were so worried it would become. You're not going through linear levels shooting anything that moves. Instead, you're exploring different biomes, finding new gear that opens up more pathways you couldn't previously explore, all while shooting anything that moves. This type of search action gameplay was made popular with 2D games like Metroid, of course, and Castlevania. There's a clever genre name in there, I know it. However, Retro Studios didn't just simply convert this gameplay into 3D, they took advantage of that extra dimension with clever mechanics, like the boost ball ramps that incorporated speed and physics. A lock-on system was placed in there as well to make aiming easier with the GameCube controller. There's also the thermal and X-ray visors, which put the first-person perspective to creative use, providing ways for Samus to see in the dark, find hidden items, and see those darn Chozo ghosts. I hate these things. Retro Studios thought outside the box when converting Metroid into 3D with Prime, and it resulted in a game we're still talking about 20 years later. Not to mention, 3D Metroidvanias are exceptionally rare, with a few examples being Batman Arkham Asylum, the new Tomb Raider games, and the last two God of Wars. It's an exceptionally hard genre to pull off in 3D, which only makes Metroid Prime a more impressive feat. We can't talk about Metroid Prime without bringing up the bosses, and even though the latter Prime games have better ones, the first title laid the groundwork for them. After all, you can't have Quadraxis without getting Thardis first, though both are awesome. Metroid Prime has a slew of bosses and mini-bosses that put Samus's skills to the test. A lot of the mini-bosses suck at first, looking at you Warwasp Hive, but they soon get better with the likes of Flagra, Thardis, the Omega Pirate, Meta Ridley, and the Metroid Prime. You didn't just shoot their weak points and dodge their attacks to kill them, you had to take advantage of your newly acquired items to bring them down. Flagra, for example, could only be killed by the Morph Ball bombs, only being stunned by disabling the mirror arrays, giving it sunlight. And if you didn't use the thermal visor to find Thardis' weak points, that battle was very difficult. Because most of these bosses were giant, a lot of players probably felt intimidated, feeling so small against these colossi. Heck, even some of the mini-bosses weren't so mini, like Sheegoth. But one of these bosses isn't so big, that being Meta Ridley, who's still fairly large, just not compared to the other ones. Regardless, it was a thrill to fight Samus's #1 enemy in 3D. Seeing him quickly fly around the arena from far away to close quarters was exhilarating, and he was somehow scarier on the ground, as he would charge towards Samus in the blink of an eye. Thankfully, Samus still defeated him, proving not even a flying dragon pterodactyl thing named after Ridley Scott could bring her down. That said, the satisfaction of defeating the other giant bosses also evoked a sense of victory, because even if most of us played the game on 24-inch CRTs, we still felt those epic bosses tower over us in Metroid Prime. But do you know what really makes us appreciate Metroid Prime the more we hear about it? It's the stories from developers who have recently took to Twitter and appeared on podcasts to discuss their experiences working on the game. Not just about the culture, but the tools they used to make the game look good and run well on the Nintendo GameCube. One of the more well-known features is how the blast doors were cleverly repurposed to disguise load times, as they wouldn't open until the next room had finished loading. Most of the time it was seamless, but this explains why some doors seemed to take longer than others if you ran up to them a little too quickly. That's a cool detail, but there are way more development tricks Retro Studios used in Metroid Prime. Adding to the usage of doors, former Retro dev Zoid Kirsch explained on Twitter how the doors in the Morph Ball tunnels prevent Samus from falling into an empty void that would be there if the next room didn't load all the way. Another dev, Jack Matthews, recently talked about how they somehow pulled off having 4 different visors while maintaining the 60 FPS frame rate, like the thermal visor turning off all the world lighting in place of post-process filters, and the X-ray visor makes only the enemies and arm cannon see-through, while everything else is pretty much the same. The more we find out about clever tricks like these, the more we appreciate Metroid Prime and the amount of problem solving that took place while making it. Of course, the behind-the-scenes stories are interesting as well. The podcast Kiwi Talks has interviewed a number of former Retro Studios staff members, and most of them talked about their experiences with Shigeru Miyamoto.
You could just tell that he knew exactly what he was talking about, and just, brilliant designer.
That said, the most shocking part of Metroid Prime's development is that mere mortals made this game instead of gods. And those are 5 ways Metroid Prime still absolutely rules 20 years later. Tell us what you love about Metroid Prime in the comments below, and until next time, bye.